It begins quietly, a strange dream, a sudden synchronicity, a feeling that everything is about to change. Then, without warning, the ground beneath your psyche gives way. You're no longer who you thought you were. The world no longer makes sense, and the truths you once clung to dissolve into ambiguity. This is not enlightenment. Not yet. It's the breakdown before the breakthrough. Spiritual awakening is often romanticized as a serene unfolding of higher consciousness. But for many, it begins as a psychological crisis, a confrontation with reality so raw and destabilizing that it mimics, or even triggers, a full-blown mental breakdown. The process can be terrifying, disorienting, and isolating. Yet within this rupture lies the potential for profound transformation. The awakening that breaks you, a spiritual awakening, is not merely a shift in belief, a dismantling of identity. It challenges the ego's narrative, exposes unconscious patterns, and forces a reckoning with existential truths. The result can feel like psychological shock. A sudden, overwhelming flood of insight that the mind is not prepared to integrate. Common symptoms include disorientation, a loss of temporal, spatial, or personal grounding, emotional volatility, intense waves of grief, rage, ecstasy, or despair, cognitive overload, racing thoughts, intrusive insights, or obsessive questioning, existential dread, a confrontation with death, meaninglessness, or cosmic vastness, depersonalization, feeling detached from one's body, thoughts, or identity. These symptoms mirror those of acute stress reactions, trauma responses, and even psychotic episodes. But unlike clinical pathology, the spiritual breakdown often arises from an internal expansion, not a collapse. Psychological shock, when reality hits too hard. Psychological shock occurs when the mind encounters information or experiences that exceed its capacity to process. In spiritual awakening, this shock is often existential. You may realize that your life has been built on false assumptions, that your relationships are rooted in unconscious trauma, that your sense of self is a construct. This realization can be so jarring that it triggers a cascade of neurological and hormonal responses. Cortisol spikes, leading to anxiety, insomnia, and hypervigilance, dopamine dysregulation, causing hallucinations, paranoia or manic insight, amygdala activation, heightening fear and emotional reactivity. Default mode network disruption, dissolving ego boundaries, and narrative coherence. In short, the brain enters survival mode while the soul begins its rebirth. Ego death and the collapse of identity. One of the most destabilizing aspects of spiritual awakening is ego death. This is not metaphorical, it's a neurological and psychological unraveling of the self model that governs perception, behavior, and memory. When the ego collapses, individuals may feel that they no longer exist, that their thoughts are not their own, that reality is a simulation or illusion, that they are merging with a larger consciousness. While these experiences can be ecstatic, they are often preceded by terror. The ego resists dissolution. It clings to control, identity, and familiarity. The breakdown occurs when the ego realizes it cannot hold Anand. The psyche must rebuild itself from the ashes. The role of trauma and shadow work. Spiritual awakening often dredges up unresolved trauma. As consciousness expands, suppressed memories, emotions, and archetypes rise to the surface. This is known as shadow work, the process of confronting the parts of the self that have been denied or repressed. This confrontation can feel like psychological warfare. Nightmares intensify, relationships implode. The body may react with illness, fatigue, or pain. The mind may spiral into guilt, shame, or rage. Yet this purging is necessary. The breakdown is not a failure, it's a cleansing, a recalibration of the psyche to accommodate a more authentic self. Clinical versus mystical. The diagnostic dilemma. Mental health professionals often struggle to distinguish spiritual awakening from psychosis. The symptoms overlap, but the context differs. Psychosis is typically marked by disorganized thought, paranoia, and detachment from consensual reality. Spiritual awakening, while disruptive, often includes heightened coherence, insight, and a drive toward integration. Psychiatrist Stanislav Grof coined the term spiritual emergency to describe this gray area. He argued that many individuals diagnosed with mental illness are actually undergoing transformative processes that require support, not suppression. However, without proper guidance, a spiritual awakening can devolve into pathology. Medication, hospitalization, or isolation may be necessary in extreme cases. The key is discernment and compassionate care. Integration, rebuilding after the rupture. The breakdown is not the end, it's the threshold. Once the psyche has shattered, it can be reassembled with greater clarity, depth, and resilience. Integration involves grounding practices. Meditation, journaling, nature immersion, therapeutic support, trauma-informed therapy, somatic work or spiritual counseling, community connection, sharing experiences with others who understand the journey, creative expression, art, music, writing as tools for meaning-making, philosophical inquiry, exploring existential frameworks that honor complexity. Over time, the chaos gives way to coherence. The pain becomes wisdom, and the breakdown becomes the foundation for a more expansive consciousness. Final reflections. The gift of the fall to awaken spiritually is to fall apart psychologically. It is to face the unbearable truths that most people spend their lives avoiding. It is to lose everything you thought you earned. Discover something deeper, vaster, and more real. This process is not easy, it is not glamorous, it is not always safe, but it is sacred. The mental breakdown that accompanies spiritual awakening is not a sign of weakness, is a rite of passage. A descent into the underworld of the psyche, where the soul is forged in fire. And when you emerge, you are no longer merely human. You are something else, something whole.